Welcome to the morning show, broadcasting on Channel 9 as well as live streaming on Port Media's YouTube channel at www.ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon if you prefer to watch that way. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and I'm so pleased to welcome you. We have a really interesting show today. Lisa Dube is here. She's a licensed independent clinical social worker with a private practice here in Newburyport, and among her areas of expertise is working with transgender individuals and their families. So she has much wisdom to share with us about transgender identities. And then at the second portion of the show, I'm going to welcome David Yang, Artistic Director of the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival, and he'll be filling us in on the very special 2020 pandemic version of the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival this year. But let me begin by introducing you to Lisa Dube. Lisa, welcome, and thank you so much for visiting us here on the morning show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure and my privilege. Well, let's dig right in, Lisa. The first thing I've been keen to ask you is, in your experience, what are some of the most common misunderstandings and inaccuracies that people have about transgender people?
So one very common inaccuracy or myth is that transgender individuals always want to have surgery to change their bodies.
Yeah.
And that frequently is a question that people will ask a trans person, which is not really considered an appropriate question. But there are many trans people that don't have a desire to change their bodies. So that's a common thing. Another thing is that there's a tendency to conflate sexual orientation with gender identity. So sometimes if people don't understand what a transgender identity means, they might assume that it has something to do with who someone is attracted to. However, trans identity just means that that's how that person identifies, and it doesn't have anything to do with who they're attracted to. And I guess finally, the idea that there's sort of one way to be trans. And what we know is there's an infinite amount of ways that people who are trans can be. So there's not one sort of script about what it means to be trans. So I think those are some of the.
Well, that's interesting and helpful to begin with. So what you're saying is there's a lot of diversity among people who might properly describe themselves with the adjective trans. Could you give us an example then? So I know a lot of people are confused about the difference between transgender and transsexual. So maybe you could dig in there and help us understand that distinction.
So transsexual is a term that was used years ago. And at the time that it was used, it was not considered a negative term, but it's now considered somewhat of a negative term. There are, however, people that still use that term. And if it's used as a self-description by someone, that is their choice to use that word. However, I would say the more contemporary word is transgender. And for people to use transsexual is not considered the proper terminology.
Okay. Well, it's so good for us to know that we're not wanting to, unwittingly give offense to somebody. So the current term is transgender. Okay. Yeah. Well, now I'm curious to find out, how old are people generally, Lisa, when they begin to feel as though the sex that's been assigned them at birth doesn't align with whom they feel themselves to be? And how do they know that?
So there's a variety of times within individuals' lives where it's more likely to sort of show up. So what we know is that around age 3, children end up sort of understanding more what gender means. So there are people as young as 3 years old that sometimes recognize that the sex assigned at birth doesn't match with who they see they are. And then also around puberty is another common time. And then after that, it's pretty varied. But those are some common times for younger people to begin to understand that their sex assigned at birth doesn't align with who they see themselves as.
So there's a diversity and something of an age range, although certain kind of pivotal moments of identity develop also that tend to kind of be correlated with when people start to, when you think about it, the first question anybody asks about even, I was going to say about a newborn, but it's even earlier than that. When people find out someone is pregnant, often the first question they ask, is it a boy or a girl? So
Mhm.
those assignments begin very early on. And what you're saying is that the sense of discord or misalignment, I guess would be a way to put it, can also begin as early as 3 years old, which is very young.
Mm. And the
So,
other thing I want to differentiate is this idea of sex versus gender.
mm,
So sex is the external genitalia,
mhm,
and that is how individuals tend to be assigned at birth. And then gender is who we see ourselves in our brain. So they're sort
mm,
of, they can be different. For
mhm,
most people, the sex that they're assigned at birth matches their gender, but for many people it does not. And that's
mhm.
where we have transgender identities.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that makes sense, and an important distinction. I know that's kind of key to the key to everything in terms of being transgender. Well, I wanted to find out, I know you work with transgender individuals, but I think you work with family members as well.
Mhm.
So what kind of support do you provide for family members?
So generally families will seek me out when a child or a family member has told them that they're trans, sort of looking for guidance. Um, and oftentimes, my role is just to provide them education, connect them to resources, and help them sort of develop a new narrative for their child.
Hmm.
So sometimes families might feel like they're losing a child. And my
Hmm.
goal in therapy is to help them understand that they're losing the story that they had for their child, but their child is still the same person. So it may be that they had a narrative that their child was female and their child is a boy. So how do we change the narrative versus believing that we've lost a child? So I feel like that's sort of one of the biggest things that I try to help families do is sort of shift the narrative that they had for their child's life, because there are plenty of transgender individuals that lead happy and healthy lives. And it's not that being trans is sort of a bad thing that means that people can't have happy and healthy lives.
Well, I like the way, I'm struck by the way you put that in terms of parents are really losing a narrative, but what you help them to do is develop a different narrative that is positive and fills in whatever sense of loss they may have. Because I mean, I think as soon as, I was talking before about how one of the first questions anybody asks about even a pregnancy, much less a newborn, is boy or girl, is the narratives begin then.
Mhm.
Because people have certain expectations about what a boy will do. They'll play football, they'll play hockey, or for a girl, she'll be a princess,
Mhm.
uh, oh, a warrior, a Xena warrior princess. I don't know, but there will be a narrative in both parents' minds. And so that sounds very powerful and very positive, that what you do is help the parents understand that that is one narrative and you're losing that narrative. But there's other narratives that have to do with the child that you may be meeting. And then, as you come to terms with and find a different way of thinking about meeting your child as they are, I guess would be one way to put it, and
Mhm.
then finding a positive and a hopeful narrative. That sounds like a very powerful intervention, Lisa. How do families respond when you suggest, well, you need a new narrative?
I think that there can be resistance
Hmm.
because this is hard for families,
Yeah.
because that narrative is so sort of ingrained. So if your child was born female and you had all these images for what your child's life was going to be like, it can feel like a sense of loss that your child isn't going to perhaps, walk down the aisle in their wedding dress or,
Yeah.
have children, um,
Right.
physically have children.
Hmm.
Um, that can be hard. And I think that it can parallel the stages of grief
Hmm.
where, there's this first, you know, there can be parts where you're trying to renegotiate, there can be angry parts, and sort of going through that process with people and really helping them to understand that the most powerful thing that they can do for their family member or child is to really accept them, because what we know is that when people are accepted, they're most likely to be happy and healthy.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've been talking a little bit about nomenclature and how it's changed over the years. And I wanted to talk to you about the outdated term, because I think a lot of people still think of surgery, or call it reassignment surgery.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you've taught me, thank you very much, Lisa, that the current usage is it's the much more positive term, gender affirming surgery, which of course suggests connotatively and denotatively all kinds of different things than a reassignment. It suggests that you're correcting for what is actually there. You're creating an integrity for the person, actually. Now that's very positive. So you've talked a little bit before that not all transgender people necessarily feel the need for or want to seek out gender affirming surgery, but I'd be interested in learning a little bit more from you about why or why not. What are some of the variables that people consider?
So I think it's just, the sense of your body. So it
Mm,
is possible that women can have penises and still feel that they are who they are.
mm-hmm,
Likewise, men who have vaginas. So
mm-hmm,
that's, secondary sex genitalia, but we assume that it's binary, and it's possible, there is a continuum of sort of what works for people. So it's really
mm-hmm,
a personal decision around, what do you feel most comfortable with?
mm-hmm,
Um, so I think that's, the variation is that it's an individual choice around how does someone see their body, how do they feel comfortable in their body,
mm-hmm,
and it isn't always that it has to align perfectly.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it just kind of makes our brains expand.
Mhm,
And in terms of, you were talking before, but there's a difference between sex characteristics and gender. And the notion that you just were describing means it kind of like makes all of that much more fluid and
mhm.
much less rigid. And it opens up more choices, really for everyone, which seems to me like choice is good. It's a positive thing in life. But that also reminds me of, you sent me a very simple but very clarifying graphic. It's called the Gender Unicorn, and it's
Mhm.
put out by the Trans Student Educational Resources, and anybody out there can find it easily online. Just Google Gender Unicorn and you'll find it. And I was hoping that you could help us understand also some of the distinctions regarding gender identity and gender expression, and how each of us is a unique manifestation of gender variables, a one and only unicorn, so to speak.
So gender expression is the way that I present myself to the world. So I am a cisgender woman. Cisgender means my sex aligns with what I was assigned at birth. Um, but if I choose to cut my hair short, dress in a way that is more masculine, that might be a more male expression.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't change that my gender identity is female.
Yeah.
Whereas if I was a person who had discomfort with being a female and felt my felt sense was that I was male internally, that would be gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many, for instance, there are many boys who might dress feminine, who might wear a dress, who enjoy sort of playing with their gender expression, who don't see themselves as girls.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And
And
then
it
there are people who do.
and then separate from that, on the gender unicorn is sexual orientation,
Mhm.
which is not necessarily correlated, although I think many stereotypes would assume that there was a correlation. But maybe you could clarify that for us as well about the gender unicorn, that that is also distinct, Lisa.
Right. So gender identity, I talked about how gender identity can present as early as 3,
Yeah.
whereas sexual orientation comes later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Sexual orientation is not fixed generally till like between 10 and 12 years old,
Mm-hmm.
approximately, whereas gender identity can present much earlier. Um, so gender identity is your felt sense of who you are, whereas sexual orientation is who you're attracted to. And they're completely different concepts. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes people will assume that, they're connected, and they're actually not.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that just, just dispels certain assumptions and stereotypes that people may have. We're all
Mhm.
unicorns and different combinations of all of the different things you've been talking about. Well, so that's part of what I liked about the gender unicorn graphic that you sent. It goes a long way towards establishing that gender characteristics really are a matter of diversity, not pathology. And to
Mhm.
underscore that point, I wonder if you could also clarify the difference between the phrases used, gender nonconformity and gender dysphoria. and why these may overlap, but don't necessarily overlap.
Mhm. So gender nonconforming is when someone is behaving outside of cultural norms in terms of how culture sees gender. So when a boy or masculine or male person wears a dress, that would be gender nonconforming.
Mhm.
And again, if the person chooses to wear a dress but doesn't see their identity as female, that is gender nonconforming behavior. Whereas gender dysphoria is more of a distress around having or being identified as male when you see yourself as female. So it might be that you have gender dysphoria because your voice is deep or because you have facial hair and you don't see yourself as a male. Those are
Mhm.
different ways that people can have gender dysphoria.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, you know, I was also interested in learning about how people think about determining the age at which, if someone were interested in having gender affirming surgery, how people go about determining at what age a decision about that would be advisable. And you explained to me that there were standards of care that have been established by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, or WPATH, as they call it. Could you say more about what these are and how they're used to discern best practices in providing appropriate support and care for transgender and gender nonconforming individuals?
Yeah, so they're considered guidance. And with respect to gender affirming surgery, the standard is generally the age of majority, which is 18.
Hmm.
However, there are instances where people are having surgery prior to that, and it might be because their sense of their gender has been longstanding. So there are individuals that have been transgender since they were 7, 8 years old. They've socially transitioned, and now they're ready to go to the next step. Obviously, for that to occur, it has to involve parental consent. So it's a very thought out process of ensuring that the person's sense of their gender has been consistent. So
Hmm.
that would never happen with somebody who's just recently said, "Oh, I'm transgender," and then 6 months later would like to have gender affirming surgery. That would not be within the
Yeah.
standards of care. So it's a
Yeah.
thoughtful process, but
Hmm.
generally it's 18 with some exceptions depending on the particular situation.
Okay. Yeah. And in other words, it's a careful discernment that
Mhm.
unfolds over time. So, Um, well, you know, when people come to your practice with their concerns about, some gender dysphoria or just, sorting things out in their life, what are the types of clarity or support that they come to you looking for, Lisa?
Very frequently, someone will come to me and they will want me to tell them whether they're trans or not.
Mm,
And I will say right out of the gates that I can't I can't give them that certainty. What I'm happy to help them do is explore with them sort of their gender, how it's constructed, how they feel, and help them to resolve for themselves, who they see themselves as, what makes them feel that they're living their best life, that they're being authentic. And many times they have anxiety or depression, and it's related to that sense of gender dysphoria. So my role is really just helping them explore that and figure that out so that they can have a better sense of who they are.
in other words, you can be the guide, but it's their journey, so
Yes,
to speak.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, how long have you been working with people on these issues, and has it gotten any easier over time for families and communities to offer support and acceptance?
So I've been doing this for about 4 years. And I would say that in some aspects it's gotten easier, and then in others it has not. So um, with the younger generation, it is somewhat easier in that among their peer groups, there's much more acceptance for transgender identities. It's really not that uncommon. I don't know if I ever shared the statistics, but in Massachusetts, there's approximately 20,000 kids within the public school system that identify as trans. And those are
Huh.
figures that come from the Department of Education.
Uh-huh.
So if we look at that, it's approximately 2%.
Hmm.
So in a school that has, 100 kids, there's likely to be at least 2 kids that identify as trans. So these identities are becoming more common.
Hmm.
Um, Forgive me because I forgot the second part of the question.
Oh, I think you've already answered. I'd asked you how long you've been doing it and whether you feel that families and communities that it's gotten easier to offer support to
Okay.
people. And I think you're saying, I mean, that's an interesting statistic, 20,000. And like that in any given school, there are likely to be a couple of kids,
Mhm.
which means that it is something that communities will have the opportunity to confront in hopefully a positive way. So,
Yes, and I think we're pretty fortunate in Massachusetts because the Department of Education has a program called the Safe Schools Program that works with schools around helping them support trans children. You know, outside of Massachusetts, it's been a little bit harder because there are states that are sort of repealing laws that provide protections. So when we talk about what's easier, we're fortunate in Massachusetts, but there are other parts of the country where things are becoming harder.
well, that raises a question that I was keen to ask you, which is why do you think some people have such fear and judgment of transgender people?
I think oftentimes people have fear and judgment because they don't know somebody who's trans.
Hmm.
I heard Janet Mock, who's a trans advocate and trans woman herself, talk about the fact that approximately 80% of individuals don't know someone who's trans. So if you don't know someone who's trans, all you have to rely on around what your perception is of what it means to be trans is sort of what the media tells us or what you see and hear people say, which is generally not accurate information.
Which is likely to be very stereotypical.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think the important thing is that trans people are normal, everyday people, just like you and I. And
Hmm.
when people sort of see that trans people are just like anyone else, that helps dispel a lot of the um, some of the feelings that people might have about
Yeah.
things that they don't know about.
Well, hopefully this is a self-reinforcing opening up of acceptance. If the key to what it takes for greater acceptance is for people to begin to know someone who is trans, and trans people from school age on up are more visible and more well known. It gives people the opportunity to understand and to humanize somebody who
Yes.
might otherwise seem as the other,
Hmm.
and begin to recognize, they like the same musical groups I do. They like the same, kinds of, food that I do. They have the same goals and aspirations for happiness in life that I
Yes,
do.
absolutely.
So that seems like hopefully something that can keep opening up. And kind of along those lines, though, I wanted to ask you if you um, have observed a generational shift in attitudes toward gender in general. And if so, how do, in your view, younger people view gender in different ways than older generations do? And why do you think this has evolved?
I do think that the younger generation definitely views being trans as a much more, or gender as a much more fluid process. Um, and I'm not really sure, what the reason is. Um, Other than I think as there's more acceptance among that age, it's sort of embraced by their peers. And if you
Mhm.
sort of are seeing it more commonly and you have an understanding of it, it might result in your being more accepting,
Mhm.
and understanding that, identities can be fluid.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, along those lines, you shared with me a heartbreaking statistic. You told me that the suicide rate among transgender people whose families are not supportive of them is a jaw-dropping 40 to 50%. And that just seems unacceptable to me, because to me, all of us are dehumanized when any one of us is dehumanized, and all of us miss out when any person's beauty and talent and gifts are lost
Mhm.
at a younger age because of prejudice and fear, especially. So, Lisa, in your views, what can all of us do to create a safe and inclusive society so we can eliminate that heartbreaking statistic?
So let me just clarify, it's suicide attempt between 40
Okay.
and 50%. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure about the
Yeah.
completed number, but it's attempt.
Okay.
And I think what we can do is just accept people for who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And we can understand that gender can be a continuum, and that we don't have to be afraid of people who are not like us. So the more that we can embrace the idea that there can be people with diverse identities, not feel that we need to put people into a box
Mhm.
and accept people for who they are,
Mhm. Yeah.
I think that, we're on the path to helping people feel like, I mean, one of the major factors for individuals who identify as who are trans is that there's this concept of transphobia. And even
Mm.
if you're a trans person, you can have this internalized transphobia. So it's the belief that many people in society hold that being trans is not okay, similar to like the concept of homophobia.
Sure.
So you could
Yeah.
still be trans and have internalized transphobia because you live in a society that sends that message.
Sure. So certainly overcoming and diminishing internalized transphobia would be a key to lowering that statistic of
Yes.
attempts,
Yes.
because if you're struggling within yourself, I mean, it's hard enough to struggle with the outside world,
Mhm.
but to add to that struggling inside yourself is just, amplifies your pain. So
Mhm.
hopefully just having conversations like this and the work that you do, thank you very much, can
Thank
help
you.
us lower that statistic and just create more knowledge and more familiarity. But part of familiarity can be media as well. So one of the things I wanted to ask you was if there are films or TV shows that you think do a good job of presenting transgender identities and lives.
So there was a great documentary that came out in about 2016 that was hosted by Katie Couric called Gender Revolution. It's available on Netflix. It was a National Geographic special, and I think she does a great job of exploring what's happening with gender right now.
Mm-hmm.
For younger children, there are some animated cartoon shows, Steven Universe and She-Ra Warrior Princess, that have trans characters.
Uh-huh.
And then for adults, there's a show, and it's won many awards. It's called Pose, and it has the largest transgender cast of any show that's ever been aired.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's about the '90s ballroom scene.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, any trans character in that show is actually a trans person, because historically
Ah.
there have been times where the media has had trans characters, but they've had them played by cisgender individuals. And there's now more understanding that if there's a trans character, it should be played by a trans character.
Okay.
And then finally, there's Supergirl, which is another show. And Natalie Maines, who is a young woman from Maine, a trans woman, is a main character on that, who's also a
Oh.
trans character. So
Oh,
those are some
many
shows.
things to check out, especially She-Ra. I mean, I had no idea. That's great. Well, finally, Lisa, what resources? And you've mentioned some media, but are there other resources that you recommend if people want to learn more in general
Mhm.
about the topic, or if they themselves feel like they were looking for some support?
So if families are looking for support around having a child that is trans, I absolutely recommend PFLAG. They've been around for a long time, and they do parent groups, and they provide a lot of supports. For children who might be questioning their gender, there are things like the Trevor Project, which provides support. There are groups that are available. There's something called NAGLY in Salem, McVagley in North Andover, that are groups for kids who either are trans or maybe questioning their gender. And then I would recommend, there's some websites. Gender Spectrum is a great website out of California that has some great material around gender. And within Massachusetts, there is a website called the Mass Transgender Political Coalition, which
Okay.
has information and resources as well. So there's a lot of information out there for people who might be interested. And not to give my own plug, but my website has a ton of resources as well, including books and links to pretty much all of the websites that I'm describing to you today.
Yes, no, I mean, that's an important resource, because I've visited your website, and there's lots of really wonderful material there, including how people can find you if they want to. So could you give the URL for that, for
Sure.
your website?
It's www.transgender, Merrimack River Wellness, all one word, and the word Merrimack has a K at the end.
Thank you for that. I'm always myself wondering, is there a K or not? So include the K. Lisa, my gosh, thank you for educating us today, and thank you for the work you do. It's so important to move us all closer to a world in which people can be accepted for who they are, and so we can all thrive together. I really appreciate your taking the time to visit us on the morning show today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It was great to have you here. Thank you so much, Lisa. Take care now.
You too.
Well, all right, I'm going to shift now and let's see if we can bring David Yang on screen. David Yang is the artistic director of the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival, and he's also the director of chamber music at the University of Pennsylvania. David, hello, welcome. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you, Mary. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to have you here.
Good to be here. That was a terrific conversation just now.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, very, very interesting topic and such useful information. I learned a lot from Lisa both today and also in our 10-minute conversation we spent on the phone preparing for the interview. I've just needed to be updated. So anyway.
Can I just respond positively to something that she was talking about?
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't had much or really any experience with the trans community until I had recently I had a student in my program at the university. And, you know, I consider myself tolerant and open-minded and stuff, but I just hadn't had experience. And this student is just fantastic. And, you know, it's one thing to think of all this kind of abstractly, but when you meet someone and you realize they're a human being just like anyone else, and I mean, it's absurd to even say that, of course, but it seems so foreign on some levels, and then you realize it's not foreign at all.
Yeah.
Just having this student just in a subtle way, but a very noticeable way, just completely changed everything for me, actually.
Well, and you know, according to what Lisa was saying, that's what makes all the difference for people. You know, you're right. In some ways, it seems like, why should it make that big a difference? But it does, because we get to know people as individuals. And I think when they're individuals to us, we're busy recognizing what we have in common with them. And the differences that seem so much larger, perhaps, when we're applying a category like trans to them, they begin to fade, and they become background, or simply an interesting aspect of who they are, rather than a primary and perhaps stereotypical aspect of their whole identity. So that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that, David.
Yeah, well, the way I mean, recently I was looking through some old letters I came across of my parents when they were in their 20s. And I found a letter, I know this is what we're talking about, but I found a letter from my—
We'll get there.
I found a letter from my grandfather to my father. So my father was Chinese, ethnic Chinese from China, and my mother was this Jewish girl from Brooklyn. And this letter, both parents on both sides were like, you know, this marriage can't happen, must not happen. And just, you see, and this is in the 1950s, the early 50s. And just this level of intolerance, which, you know, now people wouldn't even really think twice about something like that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a great conversation with Lisa.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, you know, David, I wanted to start just by asking you how you're doing in throughout the pandemic. You are both a musician and an educator, and those are both professions that have been highly impacted by the shutdown, and continues to be impacted with no clear end in sight. So, how have you adapted to the pandemic and the shutdown?
Well, it's boy, yeah, it's been a rough year.
Yeah.
In all sorts of ways. But you know, we've got music. I'm practicing some repertoire which I normally don't get to do. A lot of solo stuff, and trying to play some Bach pretty much every day, which makes a huge difference. And time with my family, and yes, some teaching online. We're gearing up for the university, so as director of chamber music, there's going to be all these chamber groups that I'm going to be coaching virtually.
Interesting.
But I guess the big thing was just, yeah, the festival itself. Normally I'd be traveling all summer at other festivals, and I kind of have things lined up at the beginning of the summer so that, you know, I arrive at the festival, we start rehearsing everything, organize, schedule and stuff. But we had to recalibrate and create this whole festival online pretty much for this summer. And it's been fun, it's been exciting, and it's been just an inordinate amount of work, huge, massive quantities of just time and hours and research and things. And it's been fun, and I think we've got something pretty good for people, not the usual thing, which is a lot of festivals are just going to all these kind of online live stream concerts, you know, something like that every day, which is great, and I'm glad people are doing that. But you know, for myself, I've been going just a little crazy, just staring at the computer. So we were trying to come up with things that are a little different, or maybe listening to the computer, but maybe a little, you know, in different ways. So yeah, it's, you know, we're all adjusting in all sorts of ways right now.
And it's an ongoing process. Absolutely. Well, you know, I love the Chamber Music Festival, and I look forward to it from its end in August to the beginning of the next August. So I'm so glad that you decided to go ahead with a special pandemic version of some virtual and some live streaming programming. But I'm curious to find out, what factors did you consider, David, in deciding to go ahead? You mentioned other music. I mean, many festivals have just canceled altogether. What factors did you consider in deciding to go ahead and come up with a creative way to do the Chamber Music Festival in Newburyport anyway?
Well, I think, geez, I mean, it's a good question. I guess I feel a very close connection to the audience in Newburyport. I mean, very personal. I think it's one of the things about the festival that feels very unique to me, because, you know, we'll give a concert, and I look out and maybe there are 150 people there. And for the most part, I'll recognize 80% of the people in the audience. I might not know their names, but they're people I've seen before. And there's a very deep, close personal connection between the musicians, the artists of the festival, and the audience. And I think part of the reason for that is that the festival is really for Newburyport. It's not, and maybe it's part of the unique character of Newburyport, because I know, right, there are all these talks about, you know, development and hotels and stuff like that. But in fact, there isn't some massive Hilton, you know, along the Merrimack there.
Praise be.
Right. So our audience is really the festival's geared towards the people of Newburyport, the locals, not towards, you know, tourists, you know, come and stay in Newburyport for a week and come to our festival. And that really makes a big difference. And then all the activities of the festival designed to really, I use the word, embed the artists deep into the community. And I think I'm quite proud of what we've done there. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking of all the activities we have and all the people who come to things in the festival, and then this sense of disappointment that they'd have nothing. And, you know, it's all depressing enough as it is right now. So it's like,
yes.
You know, what can we do for the good people of Newburyport? And first I came up with this idea of the quartet caroling, and then the idea of, well, maybe there could be I could post some conversations with the artists who would have been coming but aren't able to come. And then from that it went to, it's like, well, how about, you know, putting in something about past artists, alumni, engaging in some way. And from that, you know, one idea led to another, and then we now have, I think it's a week and a half of different kind of events, some virtual, but different kinds of virtual events. And then, you know, this live stream concert, of course, one to raise money for Anna Jakes. Mm-hmm. And then the core of the festival is this kind of quartet caroling idea that we have.
Yes, and since you've mentioned quartet caroling, let's dig into that. How did you get the idea for the chamber music version of Christmas caroling?
Yeah, I don't really remember exactly. I remember when it happened. It was a Sunday morning, and I was reading about sports and in France and how they're going to work, and and this idea. This was early. I think it was late February, perhaps, or March, and it was looking like things might shut down, probably. And we were debating, are we going to cancel? God, it's amazing to think we were even debating, right? Because we had a piano recital with Michael Brown coming, and there's discussion, should we cancel, should we not cancel, what should we do? And then it became clear, all right, we have to cancel this. It's like, well, will the summer festival happen? Won't it? Will things be a little more stable during the summer? And then it's becoming pretty clear to anyone reasonable, looking at what was happening around the world before it hit us. It's like you see a tsunami in the distance, you're going to be like, this is coming here. It's not like,
Right.
oh, it'll stop before it hits our
Right.
shore, right? We'd have to cancel the festival. So, but what can we do? And I don't know, somehow this idea of what's the expression, right? If Muhammad can't go to the mountain, then we'll bring the mountain to Muhammad.
Right.
So the idea of maybe we can play for people somehow. And I had done some Christmas caroling as a kid in New York City when I was growing up, and it's fun. It's great. You've got your friends, and you're singing, you're knocking on doors, and some people are like, go away, but most people are like, this is great. So I was like, oh well, maybe just wander around. I mean, the weather's good usually in August, so bring people are going to be so thirsty for live music,
Yeah.
that we'll bring it to them, and that's exactly what we're doing.
It's an inspired idea, and I'd like to learn a little bit more about how that's going to work. I know you have you'll have a listing online at the Chamber Music website about which neighborhoods you'll be in on which day. But just fill in what it will look like a little bit, David. How many of you will there be? Will you bring chairs? Hard to play a cello standing up. And just a little bit about what people can expect if their windows are open and they start to hear some strings in the distance.
All right, well, the first thing, I have to thank the mayor, because the mayor had to give approval for this.
Yeah.
And just want to thank her.
Thank you, Mayor Holliday.
Mayor Holliday. All the musicians are coming from Massachusetts except myself and my daughters. Mm-hmm. And we're getting up, I don't know, almost a week early, and immediately getting a COVID test first off.
Yeah.
For one of the last groups to get the rapid response COVID test. So we'll be getting that, and we'll have results early. Assuming they're fine, then we'll go on. If they're not fine, then I'll be finding a sub for myself, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But we have 3 days of caroling in the afternoon, once the sun is low enough, right? Because we've got 300-year-old instruments, and we'll be in certain neighborhoods. And I gave my word to the mayor, there will be no crowds. So it's part of the reason we're not announcing the route. Mm-hmm. We'll spend 1 day in the north end, 1 day in the south end, 1 day in the west end, about 4 hours each place. And we're just going to start, and we're going to walk. And there'll be 5 of us, 5 musicians, 1 chair. We have a special cello chair, portable cello chair. We have a support staff with us.
Oh, good.
There'll be a car, and they'll be moving the stands, and have music and water and everything like that, socially distanced, of course. Mm-hmm. And we'll just, anytime, if we see someone sitting out on their porch, drinking a martini, or someone gardening, we'll stop and we'll play for, it could be a minute, 2 minutes, could be 5 minutes, just one movement of something. If we see a building and their lights on inside, or hear an air conditioner, maybe we'll knock on the door and say, hey, can we play some music for you? And then, again, very short. So movement of Bach, it's 2 minutes long, a Haydn string quartet, a Mozart quintet, 5 minutes long. And if we see enough faces appearing at windows in a couple of places, maybe we'll play a little longer, but we'll be a moving target. And the idea there is not only to cover as many neighborhoods and people as we can, but also, again, to avoid any crowds developing at all.
Yeah, well, I think it's just brilliant, really inspired, and I can't wait. I'll keep my windows open. So, the other outlet for the Chamber Music Festival, I mean, ordinarily, I like your use of the word embedded in the community, because you have in the past had open rehearsals at locations throughout Newburyport. And what you're having now are conversations and artist picks, starting yesterday, actually, with an unexpected choice, South Pacific, which I very much enjoyed. But tell us then about your conversations and artist picks online, David, and how people can find out about them.
All right. Well, first of all, they can find out by going to www.newburyportchambermusic.org, which is the festival website. And a different conversation or artist pick will be posted every day, but not before that. So it's something to look forward to. At 5 o'clock p.m. every day, something new is coming up. And you can also sign up on the website for the email list and get the announcement actually in the email. And they'll be up on YouTube and stuff like that. So the idea of the conversations, again, was just people look forward to meeting the artists every summer. And a big part of how I choose the artists is, first of all, of course, their skill, but also their warmth as human beings. And this is a criteria which I don't know how important that is for other festivals, but it's really central to ours. And I thought, well, people are going to be disappointed. They're not going to get to meet the artists and hang out with the artists. So again, I'll bring the artists to them. So we have, I think, well, we started the conversations a couple of weeks ago, releasing them kind of a teaser, one a week. And we have got 5 or 6, maybe even 7 artists who I basically, it's kind of an interview, but more just a conversation. And we talk for anywhere between 45 minutes and an hour about everything, music and art and literature and travel and where we've been. And I think of them kind of like a podcast where you can kind of dip in while you're cooking and then go off it and then later maybe listen the next day, on your morning walk or something. And then there's a performance with the conversations of that artist playing something. They're all, that's right. They're all playing. It's a chance to see the artist in a live performance. And then below I have a list of links of anything we discussed, including, music, but also, again, art and literature. So the conversations are they're much more involved, and they're being released now basically every 3 or 4 days, because take a while to get through, if one wants to go through them all. You don't have to. The artist picks are much quicker. And I went to kind of favorite artists from the festival from the past 19 years, actually. And there are about, I think there might be 7 or 8 of those. And each artist gives a little introduction, says, hello, hi Newburyport, my name is so-and-so. And I've chosen one link for you to listen to some music. And this is why I chose it. And in a few cases, the musician chose himself, playing something short. And in a couple of instances, but most of them didn't choose themselves. So, and many of them didn't choose something classical, which is also great. So yesterday, Todd Palmer, the great clarinetist, Lincoln Center, Tim Muside of Lincoln Center chose South Pacific. But we've got all sorts of other things. I don't want to ruin the surprise.
No, and David, part of the fun is knowing that, you send the email out at 5 o'clock, and so although we're all at home, in our privacy of our residence, other people are getting the same email at 5 o'clock and clicking on, and so it's kind of like a virtual community event. as well. So I think that was really inspired.
Very much, you know, music, this whole idea of live performance, and what's the difference between a live performance and a recording, right? I mean, they're different things, and I mean, recording is wonderful, but you know, then the engineer comes into it. But we're social animals, and you go to a concert and you're experiencing that as a group. It's like,
Yeah.
why is going to a movie is different than, you know, watching on your little screen, of course.
Right.
But you're all experiencing these emotions together, and you feel that energy. And I think we've all, or at least I certainly have had the experience of going to a concert, being completely blown away, and then, you know, maybe a couple of weeks later, it's posted, and seeing a video or hearing a recording of it, and it's kind of like, yeah, same thing, right?
Yeah, that reminds me, there was an interview that I heard with Yo-Yo Ma that I wanted to get your perspective on, because he was being asked about how live music is a communal experience. And then he asked the interviewer, he brought up something I was surprised. He said, your skin is your largest organ. And I didn't know where he was going with that. But he said that what music does is sound moves air molecules across our skin. The air floats across your skin and it touches the tiny hairs on your skin. So it literally touches us. And these days, we're not able to hug or shake hands. And so the idea was that literally with live music, the movement, the tangible activity of the air movement, even if we're not aware of it at the kind of the grosser level, at a more fine-tuned level, we're actually literally being touched by music, not in a metaphorical way. It was so emotional, it touched me, but literally it's touching us. And I was wondering if that Yo-Yo Ma's idea about music literally touching us in a communal way because we're physically having a similar experience makes sense to you.
Well, it certainly does, but I mean, I take that further, right? The actual, right, the sound waves coming out from your computer, even if you have a great sound system, the sound waves are actually different than if it's, a string quartet playing live for you. You're feeling that differently.
Yeah.
I guess it's part of what he's saying, but it's been processed when you're hearing it through something else. I mean, it's kind of like, what's the difference? You go out for dinner and you have a great meal, and then you bring, as my mother used to call it, a doggy bag, right? You bring a doggy bag, and eating the leftovers the next day, they're different at that point.
It's like the difference between cocktails with your friends in person or cocktails with your friends on Zoom. Zoom is a good substitute, but it's a substitute. Well, tell us about, I'm sorry, go ahead, David.
It's also different for the performer, because when you're playing, you respond differently when you're playing for people than if you're just in rehearsal. And of course, you do a dress rehearsal, you say, let's make this the best we can. But there's this great story I remember reading years ago. The German conductor, William Furtwängler, he conducted the Berlin Philharmonic, and someone went to rehearsal, and it was just a rehearsal. And Furtwängler was out. His assistant was conducting the orchestra. So this person was kind of watching the rehearsal, and he was just like, oh, it sounds good. It's Berlin Philharmonic. It's okay. And he noticed suddenly, drastically, for no reason, everything sounded very different. And the entire orchestra started playing very subtly, but really noticeably, completely differently. And he was just, something just happened. And he was like, like the air, the pressure in the room, the air just shifted. And he was watching this, and then he caught out of the corner of his eye, he saw that Maestro Furtwängler up in the top reaches, the balcony, he'd walked in. And this is a legendary conductor. And people just worshipped Furtwängler. And the orchestra, it's an empty hall, even a huge hall, you notice if there's some movement. And they all noticed that the maestro suddenly walked in the room, and it wasn't just the assistant kind of going. And they all just, focused. They just all upped their game, and, everything started vibrating a little bit more. And you play differently, you sound, you just feel differently. Yeah. And it's, it's like that when you're performing for us, performing for an audience, it's very different. it's why recordings actually can be quite hard to make, because you've got this engineer there, and you've got microphones in your face, and you're giving everything you can, but there's nobody. You're not actually playing for anyone. Yeah, it's quite strange sometimes.
Well, that kind of brings us to the concert that you'll be doing a week from Saturday at St. Paul's, one of my favorite concert venues in Newburyport. So tell us something about, you'll be in an empty church. Tell us a little bit about the live streaming concert you'll be doing, David.
All right, well, yeah, so it's going to be a fundraiser for Anna Jacobsen for the, I have to get the name right, the Garish Family Fast Track section of the hospital, which unfortunately, or fortunately, maybe, I have direct personal experience with. So yeah, I was up for the concert in December, the Baroque concert, and without going through all the gory details, I wound up in the emergency room.
Oh gosh.
And then in this fast track area, and the doctors and nurses and staff were so kind and thoughtful and genuinely caring. They really treated me well there. And
I'm glad to hear that, David. I'm sorry that you had that difficulty, but I'm really glad that they took good care of you, because honestly, you're a precious resource. So
thank you.
So
yeah, I mean, they were just amazing. So when we were looking around, we wanted to do a benefit concert this summer. By the way, everything we're doing is free. The festival's paying for everything for this summer. And we're looking around for places to raise money for. And a couple of ideas were kind of batted around, but I think in the end, we all knew pretty much it had to be Anna Jacobsen, the emergency room. And these the people in the hospital who work so hard and keep us healthy and protect us, and who are there when we need them, and frankly put their lives on the line. Right? You look at what's happened in New York, and Philly hasn't been hit as bad. I'm in Philadelphia, but I have neighbors who are emergency room doctors, and it's dangerous, and they don't have the proper equipment in many cases. And I mean, this is terrible. So we wanted to raise some money and in our own small way kind of give back to Anna Jacobsen. So we're doing this live stream concert. It's Saturday night, not this Saturday, but next Saturday, I think the 15th.
Yes.
At 7:30. And there's going to be some solo Bach. There's going to be a duo, some Handel Halvorsen. We're going to be playing Barber's Adagio for strings. And we will end with a movement of a Mozart viola quintet, kind of really joyful, just leave your cares behind, and just wonderful, kind of happy music.
Wonderful. That sounds great. I love the Adagio for strings. It's been a favorite of mine since my melancholic days in high school and college, when it would just kind of expand my sadness into something more majestic and universal. David, it sounds wonderful. I'm so grateful to you for making the decision to give us in Newburyport a chamber music festival of a different kind. Thank you so much for doing that. And also thank you for visiting the morning show. It's been a joy to have you here.
Thank you for
I
having
really
me.
appreciate your taking the time. And I look forward to, I live in the North End, and I think that's Sunday, the final Sunday, not this Sunday, but a week from Sunday, I'll be having my windows open and be on the lookout for you for sure. Thank you so much, David, as ever. It's a pleasure. So thank you very much. Well, that's it for today's morning show, everybody. Thanks for watching. I hope you'll join us next Thursday at 9 a.m. when I'll be pleased to welcome representatives of the League of Women Voters. They're going to be here to talk about the organization's history and their purpose of promoting democracy and voting, and the plans they're making now to ensure that all of us can vote safely this fall. I'll also welcome Ryan Turner, who's the new music director of the Newburyport Choral Society. We'll learn about Ryan's distinguished musical accomplishments and also his plans for the chorus and the community during this unique year for the the 85th year of the Newburyport Choral Society. If you missed any part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show at www.ncmhub.org. Just click on the YouTube icon and look for the playlist for the morning show. Each show will also air on WJOP, that's FM 96.3 on Friday at 8 a.m. and the following Tuesday at 4 and Wednesday at 3, and will be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Again, just go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the cloud icon and then scroll down. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you back here at Channel 9 and Port Media's YouTube live streaming station next Thursday at 9 a.m. Take care. Bye, everybody.